Matt GPT, I have a question. Is there an age limit for president? And if not, why?
80% of Americans want an age limit for president. 80%. Republicans, Democrats, independents, it doesn't matter. The polling is overwhelming, and it has been for years. So why doesn't it exist? Because the only people who can make it law are the exact people it would remove from power. And to understand how we got into this trap, you have to go back to 1787 and the one assumption the founding fathers got wrong. The Constitution of the United States has exactly 3 requirements to become president. You must be a natural-born citizen, you must have lived in the country for at least 14 years, and you must be at least 35 years old. The age requirement exists to ensure candidates would best understand the nation's interests, be most capable of promoting them, and have built a reputation for integrity that inspires public confidence. The founders were screening for inexperience, not for decline. The idea that someone would be too old, too far gone to serve simply wasn't part of the calculus. And understanding why requires understanding what they thought government service was supposed to be. The founders had a specific vision. You were a citizen first, a farmer, a lawyer, a soldier, a merchant. You had a life, a livelihood, roots in your community. You got called to serve, you went to Washington, you did your time, and then you went home and lived under the laws you helped create. George Washington is the model. He walked away from power twice. First, as commander of the Continental Army when soldiers were prepared to make him king and he refused. And again, after 2 terms as president when he could have stayed. He left because he believed that's what leaders were supposed to do. He thought of himself first as a farmer and a soldier. The presidency was a calling he answered, not a throne he occupied. Thomas Jefferson had a specific term for this idea. He called it rotation in office. And he was deeply worried about what would happen without it. But the founders weren't unanimous, and this is where it gets interesting. James Madison thought frequent elections were a sufficient check on power. Let the voters decide, trust the democratic process. Madison also made a deeper philosophical argument. All power ultimately belongs to the people. If the people keep electing the same person, that's the people's choice. A law that overrides that choice substitutes the government's judgment for the voters. What they didn't account for was a world where staying in Washington became enormously lucrative, where incumbency became its own self-perpetuating machine, where members of Congress would collect government salaries, government pensions, and government health care, and they would walk out the door into lobbying jobs worth 10 times more. The median age of the United States Senate today is 65. 19 members of Congress are over 80 years old. The 2 most recent presidents are the oldest in American history, which is why in 2023, when Nikki Haley launched her presidential campaign, she made mandatory mental competency tests and a constitutional amendment for congressional term limits part of her platform. Her reasoning was America is not past its prime, it's just that our politicians are past theirs. Congress made its own attempt. Republican Representative John James of Michigan introduced House Joint Resolution 87, a proposed constitutional amendment that would bar anyone from being elected president, vice president, or to Congress if they would turn 75 during their term. Not one member of Congress would sign on to it. And the reason isn't mysterious. The people who would have to pass this law are the exact people that would be affected. That's the trap the founders didn't see coming, because they never imagined anyone would want to stay long enough for it to matter. Which brings us to the present moment and why this question is back in the conversation right now. Donald Trump is 79 years old. He is the oldest president to be inaugurated in American history. And over the course of his second term, medical voices have raised serious public concerns about his cognitive fitness. NBC News medical analyst Dr. Vin Gupta has publicly stated that Trump is exhibiting signs consistent with dementia. Psychologist Dr. John Gartner has noticed that Trump has now taken the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, a screening tool specifically designed to detect cognitive impairment, at least 3 times. Gardner's point is blunt. Doctors don't give you that test 3 times because they're checking for dementia. They give it to you 3 times because they're monitoring it. So here we are. The Constitution is silent on the upper end of age. The founders assumed the problem would solve itself through civic virtue and democratic norms. Congress has demonstrated it will not solve the problem voluntarily.